On December 29, 2017, just after 9 in the morning, a plumber was on his knees in the basement of a modest two-story house on a quiet street in downtown Oshawa, Ontario, 2 kilometers from the police station. A house on McMillan Drive, the kind you would walk past 100 times without noticing. He was pulling a drain snake back out of the pipe, foot by foot, and what was coming with it was not what he had been called out to find. He picked up the phone. He kept his voice level, the way people do when their hands are shaking. We probably pulled back about 10 pounds, 15 pounds of it looks like flesh type of stuff. Meat, and we don't know what it is. 10 to 15 pounds. That was the estimate on the pipe. That was before anyone had opened the freezer downstairs. That was before anyone knew that the tenant in the basement suite, a 45-year-old gas station attendant who had lived at that address for over a decade, had been keeping a secret in that house for far longer than the recent blockage suggested. It would take another few hours before the police understood what they were looking at. A day before the tattoo on a severed neck told them the name of the girl in the freezer. Months before they realized she had not been the first. And nearly 4 years before a father in Oshawa, who had spent 14 years writing to his missing daughter online, would finally learn where she had been buried. Rori Chantal Hache was born on the 9th of July, 1999, in Oshawa, a city an hour east of Toronto that had once been built on cars and had, by the late 90s, settled into being the sort of place where children grew up walking to school, past the same houses their parents had walked past. Rori was, by every account of the people who knew her as a child, a bright girl, curious, restless, fond of animals in the specific way children are fond of animals, and, more unusually, fond of the elderly. She liked to sit with them. She liked to listen to them. She joined the Army Cadets. By the age of 13, she had been named Cadet of the Year twice. That is the version of Rori that her family kept coming back to in the years afterwards, because it was the version that was closest to who she actually was, underneath everything that came later. It was the version that made the ending impossible to accept. The turn came at 14. Someone offered her crystal meth. She took it. That was the pivot in a life that had, until then, been organized around discipline and cadets and small acts of kindness. From that point on, addiction was a shape in the room with her, and it would remain a shape in the room with her for the rest of her short life. Her family was, to put it plainly, not ordinary. Her grandfather was Bernard Guindon, better known in the Canadian underworld as Bernie the Frog, the founder and longtime national president of the Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club, at one point the largest outlaw biker organization in Canada. He had done 22 years in prison across his lifetime. Rori's uncle, Harley Davidson Guindon, was a Hells Angels member with a tattoo across his back announcing his prison fight record: 41 wins, no losses. In 2016, when Rori was 17, she lived for a period with Harley and his family while he was under house arrest on drug charges. None of this made her a hard child. It made her a child raised on the edge of a world that most children never see, loved fiercely by people who had spent their lives on the wrong side of the law, and it made her family's grief, when it came, the kind of grief that would move through channels most families do not have access to. By the summer of 2017, Rori was rebuilding. She had a boyfriend, a young man named Tony. She had her own apartment. She had gone back to school. She had found a job. Her uncle Harley had recently handed her and her mother $1,000 to help with expenses, but she had a paycheck of her own coming in, and she was, for the first time in years, standing on her own feet. And in August of that year, her aunt Michelle Guindon took her to a drugstore to buy a pregnancy test. It came back positive. Rori was pregnant. She wanted the baby. She was 18 years old, and she was walking, finally, towards something that looked like a life. She had no idea how little of it she had left. On the 10th of August 2017, there was a fire at Rori's mother's house. The cause was never explained. Shannon Dion, her mother, was injured. Her dog was killed. It was the kind of shock that lands on top of a life that has just started to steady itself, and it lands the way a hand lands on freshly poured concrete. The impression stays. Rori began to slip. Workers at the refuge, the youth center she attended regularly in downtown Oshawa, noticed she had relapsed. They said she had been doing better in August. Now they were less sure. A few days before the end of the month, her uncle Harley met her. Harley, the Hells Angels biker with the prison fight record, later described that meeting as one he could not shake. He said something was different about her. She did not want to talk. She seemed cornered, secretive. And when she hugged him, he described it as the largest hug she had ever given him. A hug that felt like a final goodbye. Harley Gwindon is not a man given to fragility. He has spent his life in the sort of world where fragility is a liability. And yet, when he recalled that hug, he described feeling helpless. That is not an ordinary word for that man to use. On the 28th of August, a constable, Christopher Kane, who had done wellness checks on Rori before, ran into her near the Midtown Mall in downtown Oshawa. Kane knew her. He had tried over the years to connect her with services. In that conversation, Rori told him she was using again cocaine and crystal meth, and that she was going on dates with men to pay for the drugs. Kane went to arrange help. By the time he came back, she was gone. The next day, the 29th of August, Rori's friend and the friend's mother took her to the hospital. She had suffered what was described as a mental episode. CCTV footage from the hospital captured the three of them sitting in the waiting room together. Then it captured Rori's friend and the friend's mother leaving. And then it captured Rori waiting alone. She waited for 15 minutes. Then she walked out. She was never examined by a doctor. She was never spoken to by a nurse. She walked out of the front doors of that hospital, and the CCTV followed her for a few seconds, and then she was gone. That was the last time Rori Hache was seen alive. Somewhere in the hours that followed, she met the man who would kill her. It was a pleasant evening on the 11th of September, 2017, at Oshawa Harbor, on the north shore of Lake Ontario. A grandfather had brought his 11-year-old grandson down to the pier to fish. They noticed something in the water. It looked like trash, the sort of thing that gets caught in the reeds along the waterline. Making the harbor a little cleaner seemed like a decent thing to do while they were out there. They cast their lines toward it, trying to hook it. It took about half an hour. The current was against them. They kept working at it, casting and drawing back, until finally they had it close enough that they could catch it in a net and haul it up onto the pier. One of them, in the seconds before they got it up, thought it was an animal, a chicken maybe. Then the grandfather said, quietly, "I think that's a body." It was a female torso. When the police arrived, they determined it showed signs of trauma. It had been deliberately severed from the rest of the body. The pelvis was missing, which meant investigators could not immediately determine whether the victim had been pregnant. The head was missing. The limbs were missing. There was almost nothing to work with, other than DNA. There was one detail on the torso that would eventually matter enormously, though it would take them months to know why. But at that moment, on the pier, on the 11th of September, the officers did not know whose daughter they were looking at. Lake Ontario is enormous. The torso could have drifted from anywhere. There was no missing person report yet. Rori had only been gone for a matter of days, and her family was still holding out hope she had simply gone off the grid. police reached out to other jurisdictions to see if any unsolved cases matched. Nothing did. The lake had washed away anything that might have pointed to a killer. 2 months passed. On the 10th of November 2017, DNA from the torso was compared against samples supplied by Rory's family. It was a match. The torso in Oshawa Harbor was Rori Hache. Her disappearance became a homicide. But even now, with a name attached to the body, the police had almost nothing else. They did not know where she had been killed. They did not know when she had been killed. They did not know how much of the time between the 29th of August and her death she had been alive. They did not know whom she had met. They did not know why. And they still had the missing head, the missing limbs, the missing pelvis. Somewhere out there, someone had the rest of her. For the next 6 weeks, the investigation went nowhere. Rory's godmother, Creasy Mildick, had already been driving the search from the community side. Flyers were pasted across downtown Oshawa. Rory's face was on lampposts, on shop windows, on the walls of the youth center where she had spent so much of her time. Mildick would later say that there wasn't a place you could go in the downtown that didn't have Rory's face on it. That was the shape her godmother's grief took, a photograph, multiplied. For the police, there was almost nothing to follow. The lake had erased whatever evidence might have pointed to the person who put her there. The last confirmed CCTV of Rory showed her walking out of the hospital alone. The next confirmed image of her was a torso 13 days later at the harbor. The window between those two images was empty. Investigators looked at everyone they were supposed to look at. They looked at Tony, her boyfriend. They looked at people at the youth center. They looked at the people she had been seen with in her final days. None of it led anywhere. Whoever had killed her had done it out of sight of the security cameras Oshawa relied on, and had disposed of what was left of her in a body of water big enough to hide a country. Meanwhile, the family waited. Her mother waited. Her boyfriend waited. Her grandfather, Bernie Guindon, a man whose entire life had been built on the principle that certain things do not go unpunished, waited. Winter came in. The temperature dropped. Oshawa slid into December. The break in the case, when it came, would not come from a detective. It would come from a clogged drain. The house at 19 McMillan Drive sat in downtown Oshawa, less than 2 kilometers from the Durham Regional Police Station. It was a 2-story rental property. Upstairs, a couple lived in an apartment. Downstairs, in a basement suite, lived a 45-year-old man named Adam Strong. He had rented that basement suite for more than a decade. In the last week of December 2017, the drains started to back up. The upstairs couple could not use their plumbing. Days went by. When they asked the tenant downstairs about it, Strong, who could not have been unaware of what was happening in the pipes, told them the blockage was an inflated condom. He asked to borrow their plumbing snake so he could clear it himself. They said no. They called a plumber. On the morning of the 29th of December, 2 plumbers arrived. The tenants let them in. They began to work on the drain. They fed a mechanical snake down into the pipes, and they began to draw it back. What came back was not what a drain snake usually catches. By the time they had pulled roughly 10 to 15 pounds of soft, flesh-like tissue out of the pipe, they had stopped what they were doing. One of them picked up the phone. We probably pulled back about 10 pounds, 15 pounds of it looks like flesh type of stuff. Meat, and we don't know what it is. Durham Regional Police were dispatched. The first officer to arrive on scene was Acting Sergeant Kevin Park, who reached McMillan Drive within minutes. 2 constables arrived shortly after. Between them, they made the call to knock on the basement suite door. The source of the blockage was, unambiguously, the downstairs unit. Strong opened the door. Park later testified that Strong seemed defeated the moment the door swung open. There was no theater, no confusion, no indignant demand to know what this was about. Park asked him, plainly, "What have you been flushing down the toilet that you shouldn't be?" Strong lowered his head. "Okay, you got me. The jig's up. It's a body." He was arrested on the spot. In the back of the squad car, he did something that career police officers rarely see. He kept talking. He was calm. He was, in his own way, cooperative. And what he said next, without prompting, is what changed the shape of this investigation forever. "If you want the rest of her, she's in my freezer, and she's pretty defleshed." Officers went back into the basement suite. They walked past the clutter and the smell and the food wrappers and the tools. They found the freezer. They opened it. Inside were the severed remains of a young woman, a head, body parts, bags of what had once been a person. The head had a tattoo on the side of the neck, a single word, alive. Read that again, alive. That was the tattoo Rori Hache had chosen for herself in the years when she was trying to hold on to herself. That was the word she had marked her own skin with. That was what her killer had preserved in the freezer of a basement in downtown Oshawa, less than 2 kilometers from the police station. She had been in that house the entire time her family had been putting flyers on lampposts across the city. The forensic search of 19 McMillan Drive took days. The suite was cramped and cluttered, filled with a stench that the responding officers would remember years later. Adam Strong had been living inside the aftermath of a killing for months, and he had not attempted, in any meaningful way, to clean it. Alongside the ordinary detritus of a bachelor's basement, takeaway containers, tools, laundry, investigators cataloged what they found: restraining devices, adult paraphernalia, knives, a hammer. On the hammer, forensic testing later identified Rory's DNA. In a plastic bag in the apartment, they found Rory's running shoes, marked with what appeared to be blood spatter. On the wall of Strong's bedroom, blood spatter. On the baseboards leading into that bedroom, blood spatter. On the ceiling above the bed, in the specific pattern that lands where a headboard would sit, blood spatter. It was a physical map of what had happened in that room, drawn in the medium the killer had used and never fully cleaned. Rory's semen, Strong's semen, was later recovered from her pelvis, which was in the freezer. They also found a pipe bomb, undetonated. The Durham Regional Police Bomb Squad was called to McMillan Drive. In front of the neighborhood, in front of the television cameras that had started to gather at the property line, the bomb squad ran a controlled detonation of the device on the street. A loud bang in the middle of downtown Oshawa. The suspicious package at the scene of a suspicious death. They pulled Strong's computer. His search history documented a fixation on extreme gore, on death, on the specific varieties of violence most people are careful never to type into a browser. It was the search history of a man for whom the crime in the basement had not been a rupture. It had been an escalation. And then, in the knife drawer, they found the hunting knife. It was the kind of knife used to skin and butcher animals. The kind of knife that could have been used to dismember a person. Investigators had it tested for Rory's DNA, expecting a match. What came back was not Rory's DNA. It was somebody else's. Her name was Candice Olga Fitzpatrick. She had been born on the 3rd of February, 1989. She had grown up in Oshawa. Like Rory, she had struggled with drug addiction. Like Rory, she had spent time on the streets. Like Rory, she was loved by a family that had not stopped looking for her. Her father, William Fitzpatrick, known to everyone as Bill, had last seen his daughter in the spring of 2008. She was 19 years old. She had a habit of leaving home for weeks at a time without telling anyone where she was going, and so when the weeks passed and she did not come back, He first assumed she was somewhere he did not know about, safe, and would come home when she was ready. She did not come home. He waited. He waited longer than any parent should ever wait for a phone call that does not come. In 2010, 2 years after he had last seen her, he formally reported her missing to Durham Regional Police. He drove through Oshawa and the surrounding cities looking for her face. He launched a Facebook page for her. And for years, he posted messages to her on that page. "Miss you, love you, Candice." Written to a daughter who, from the moment he had first felt something was wrong, had already been dead. He had spent nearly a decade writing to a girl who was buried in a field. Now, in the last days of December 2017, her DNA had turned up on a hunting knife in the kitchen drawer of a man she was never supposed to have crossed paths with. Her blood would later be identified in Adam Strong's freezer. The Durham Regional Police looked at what was in front of them, and what was in front of them was this: 2 young women from the same small city, both struggling, both connected to the same basement apartment on McMillan Drive, killed nearly a decade apart. In November 2018, Adam Strong was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The gap between those 2 killings is the most disturbing part of this case, because it forces a question the case has never answered. If Candice died in 2008 and Rory died in 2017, and there is no plausible reading in which a man like Adam Strong simply stopped for 9 years between the 2, what happened in the decade between them? Detectives quietly re-examined other missing women from Oshawa and the surrounding towns. Names came up. Nothing that could be tied to him surfaced. But the gap remains, and it does not close. He had lived at that same address the entire time. He had held ordinary jobs: the gas station, the occasional film set security work. He had walked the same downtown streets that Rory and Candice had walked. He had rented and paid and worked and existed and been unbothered. The most dangerous people are rarely the ones who seem dangerous. They are the ones who have learned very well how to seem like everyone else. There is a specific rule in the outlaw biker world that outsiders often do not understand. It is a rule about women. It is a rule about children. It is a rule about family. Bernie Gwindon himself, in an interview after his granddaughter's death, put it plainly. "The rule of being a biker," he said, "is that there are no women, no kids. If we have a problem with a guy, we go after the guy. We do not go after his niece or somebody he loves." Adam Strong had gone after somebody Bernie Gwindon loved. Within weeks of the arrest, word inside the Canadian prison system began to move. This was not a threat that needed to be spoken loudly. This was the kind of message that traveled the way important messages travel in that world, quietly, through the right ears, and then everywhere. A former convict speaking to the Toronto Sun put the calculation into a single sentence: "You cannot kill the granddaughter of somebody connected to the Hells Angels." It all gets down to that. You cannot kill a biker's granddaughter and get away with it. The Durham Regional Police became, in a way most murder investigations do not require them to become, responsible for keeping their prisoner alive. Strong knew. He had heard the same rumors the reporters had. On the 8th of November 2018, roughly 11 months after his arrest, Adam Strong sat down for an interrogation that would run for 11 hours. The detective across from him was Paul Mitten, a veteran of the Durham Regional Police, a polygraph expert, and a man other homicide detectives would later describe as one of the most skilled interviewers they had ever seen. Mitten did not push. He did not accuse. He did not raise his voice. He bought Strong a Wendy's meal. He got him a cigarette and let him smoke it in the interrogation room. He built rapport in the way that a certain kind of interviewer builds rapport, which is by letting the suspect believe he is the one running the conversation. And once Strong was comfortable, Mitten began to walk him, slowly, through the story of what he had done. Strong confessed to the dismemberment of Rory Hache. He said he had begun the process on Christmas Eve 2017 because that was when the neighbors had been away. He called himself, in his own words, a bad procrastinator. He said he had been storing her in the freezer for months because dismembering her was not something he was looking forward to. Read that again. He described the delay in cutting up her body the way a man might describe putting off filing his taxes. He described the physical act itself in a register that no ordinary person, having done this once, could produce. He said, at one point, that it felt natural the way he cut around the socket and everything released. He was preoccupied, repeatedly, throughout the interrogation, with how the torso had looked when it was found in the lake. He seemed surprised it had surfaced. He believed he had taken precautions to keep it down. Mitten would later understand why. Strong's disposal method had worked, once before. He had done this before, and he had gotten away with it before, and this time, the water had betrayed him. When Mitten pressed him about his semen being found on Rory's pelvis, Strong appeared briefly shocked, and then he offered, in the same clinical voice with which he had described cutting her body, "I took her apart, right? So could it have spilled?" He denied specific rumors of necrophilia. He offered condolences to Rory's parents, calling himself, in a phrase that has to be quoted to be believed, that kind of guy. But across 11 hours of one of the most skilled interrogations of a homicide suspect ever conducted in Ontario, Adam Strong never confessed to the killing itself. Not to Rory's, not to Kandis's. He confessed to what he did after the girls were dead. He would not name the moment he had made them dead. That was his strategy. It was transparent. As long as he sat on the dismemberment, he thought, he could not be convicted of murder. He was negotiating the entire time, for internet access, for comfort, for a specific standard of living in the years he had left. "I just want to be comfortable in jail," he said. "That's all I want for whatever years I have left." The performance of remorse maintained across 11 hours, alongside the negotiation for prison perks, is itself a kind of skill. It requires a compartmentalization most people cannot access. The man across the table from Paul Mitten was thinking, at every second, about how to trade what he knew for what he wanted, and he was thinking about it with the calm of a man ordering a sandwich. He wanted Wendy's. He got Wendy's. Adam Strong's trial began on the 28th of September 2020 in the Ontario Superior Court, before Justice Joseph DeLuca sitting alone without a jury. Much of the trial was conducted by video link because the pandemic was in its first year and the courts were adapting. Strong himself had also declined to appear in person, citing security concerns. The shadow of the biker world had not lifted, and it would not. His behavior, from the beginning, was contemptuous. There were mornings when he refused to appear at all. He complained he had been up all night. He said he was tired, he wanted to go to bed. He refused to meet with his own lawyer. The court adjusted around him because the court had to, but the record of his conduct across those months was not the record of a man who understood the seriousness of what was being decided. The Crown's case was built on what the basement had told them: the blood, the DNA, the hammer, the knife, the freezer, the tattoo, Strong's semen on the pelvis of a pregnant 18-year-old. Strong's phone tracked to Oshawa Harbor on the 4th of September 2017, a week before her torso surfaced. Two women who had known Strong 2 decades earlier testified. Both had had relationships with him. One described consensual bondage and choking. The other described choking that had made her afraid for her safety. The defense called no evidence. Strong did not testify. His lawyer, in the end, made an argument that was very nearly the same argument Strong had made to Paul Mitten across the interrogation table. Yes, the dismemberment was proven. No, the Crown had not proven that Adam Strong killed either woman. Justice DeLuca did not accept it. On the 16th of March 2021, he delivered his verdict. He found that Adam Strong had killed Rori Hache in September 2017 by repeatedly striking her in the head with a hammer or a similar object while she lay bound in his bedroom. Because that killing had occurred in the course of a sexual assault, it constituted first-degree murder. Strong was convicted of the first-degree murder of Rori Hache. For Kandis Fitzpatrick, the picture was harder. The judge found that Adam Strong had killed her. He said so plainly. But too much time had passed. There was no scene. There was no body. Not yet. There was almost no forensic evidence beyond her DNA on the knife in the drawer and her blood in the freezer. And so, on the question of intent, on the question of whether Strong had meant to kill her, which is the threshold that separates murder from manslaughter, Justice DeLuca said something that has been quoted many times since. He probably did. But probably is not the test. Adam Strong was convicted of the manslaughter of Kandis Fitzpatrick. Bill Fitzpatrick, the father who had spent 13 years looking for his daughter, who had posted on her Facebook page every year to tell her he still missed her, who had waited for the day someone would tell him what had happened to her, stood up when the manslaughter verdict was read, and he walked out of the courtroom. The gap between what a court can prove and what everyone in the room knows is one of the oldest problems in the criminal law. It is what the standard of reasonable doubt is designed to protect. It is what protects the innocent. It is also, sometimes, what protects the guilty from being called what they are. On the 28th of May 2021, Adam Strong was sentenced. For the first-degree murder of Rori Hache, he received an automatic life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. For the manslaughter of Kandis Fitzpatrick, he received 18 years to be served concurrently. Rori's godmother, Chrissia Mieldick, stood outside the courthouse in Oshawa and spoke to the reporters. "The sentence," she said, "does not change the fact our girls are not coming home. But today, we let them rest. Today, this monster is off our street and is no longer a part of our day. He is no longer a part of our lives." But there was still one part of the case that had not been resolved. Kandis Fitzpatrick's body had never been found. And then, in July 2021, only weeks after being sentenced to life in prison, Adam Strong told a prison staff member where Kandis was. The staff member contacted police. What followed was a series of interviews. There was no payment. There was no reduction in sentence. Investigators would later be careful to say that there had been, in their words, a negotiation, a small allowance for the incremental cooperation, and nothing more. On the 4th of November 2021, Strong was escorted from prison to a location in northern Oshawa. He was taken to a small clearing along a tree line near the intersection of Secreto Drive and Britannia Avenue East. He pointed to a general area where he believed he had buried Kandis Fitzpatrick back in 2008. On the 8th of November, 4 days later, human remains were located at that spot. In February 2022, they were formally identified as Kandis. 14 years since her father had last seen her. Bill Fitzpatrick, who had never expected to see her remains, would later drive up to the site on his own and sit outside it in his car for 2 hours. And he said, in a quiet interview afterwards, that all Adam Strong had gotten out of it was 1 day out of jail. He said he could accept that. Shannon Dion, Rori's mother, spoke at the same press conference. She said only, through tears, "Today, Kandis comes home." The house at 19 McMillan Drive was eventually sealed off. cleared, and resold. A new family moved in. Locally, it is known as the House of Horrors. Rory's family remains in Oshawa. Kandis's family remains in Oshawa. They know each other now. They stood together on the day Kandis's remains were confirmed, and they have stood together since. Rori Hache was 18 years old. She was born in Oshawa in the summer of 1999. She had been a cadet who won her section's highest honor twice by the age of 13. She was the kind of child who sat with old people because she wanted to hear what they had to say. She had rebuilt her life once. She was carrying a child she wanted to keep. She had walked out of the hospital on the 29th of August 2017, and she had, on some level she could not have named, still believed that things were going to be okay. Kandis Fitzpatrick was 19 years old. She was born in Oshawa in the winter of 1989. She was a girl her father loved so completely that he spent 14 years writing to her on a Facebook page in the hope that, one day, she would come back and read what he had said. She did not come back. Her father sat outside a clearing in northern Oshawa for 2 hours the day she was returned to him, and he said, quietly, that he could accept it. They were both, at their core, someone's daughter. If you want more cases like this, told in full and in their proper weight, subscribe. Some horrors are not discovered, they surface.